we'll start with a roll call. I'm going to start over here with Rob.
Robert Sullivan.
Sally Tobias.
Paul Rasmussen.
Michael Barron, Town Planner. Tom DeCapo cannot make it, and Richard will be a little bit late.
Peyton McManus.
Heather Grant.
All right. Erica just stepped out for a minute. She'll be back. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 voting members. We have a quorum.
And there's Richard.
Come on in, you guys. I'm just wrapping up roll call, so come in and announce yourselves.
Gayat.
Richard Kelly.
Erica, you're going to be sitting in Tom tonight. And while we do that, I do want to inform the board that Tom DeCapo has requested to move to one of the alternate slots. So that gives us an open regular seat. Approval of the agenda.
Any need for changes this evening?
We have a couple of other business items. Would we like to drop them in front of zoning definitions? Yeah?
I would.
Yeah.
Everyone agree? See a lot of nodding.
All right, so let's move item 10, amendment to zoning definitions, after other business.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that we approve the agenda as we just amended.
Second.
Seconded by Peyton. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That passes. Do we have anybody in Zoom tonight?
Yes, one person.
One person. Is it a board member?
No.
Thank you. Town planners report.
Nothing to report.
Nothing to report. All right. Reports from board members who serve on other committees. The Integrated Waste Management team postponed their meeting, canceled their meeting this cycle. So we will be meeting again. It's the first week of September.
And Mr. Chairman, I missed the Monday Conservation Committee meeting. Michael, was there anything to report?
Well, Sally gave up.
You missed the housing.
You missed the great, wonderful.
I've seen so much on the housing, it's a shame that I was.
Do you understand housing?
And they did a little more work on the new wetland shoreland overlay district.
And are we expecting to see that next month?
No, it'll be a few more months, I think.
Great.
There was that one discussion on the ADA analysis of the trails, accessibility, wasn't that?
Oh, yeah.
And that was sort
All
of
accessible,
important,
yeah.
putting some funding towards analysis of some of the trail systems and whether we could do more for accessibility for people that, maybe wheelchair or walkers, just to make it more available, a lot of our land's more available and, maybe identify specific trails that are capable of either not being modified or maybe a simple modification. So we're going to be working on that in the future. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, the Conservation Commission approved up to $2,200 to hire an expert, a fellow who uses a wheelchair, to evaluate 4 key town properties: Wagon Hill Farm, Jackson Landing, Thompson Forest, and Oyster River Forest, for how accessible they are to people in wheelchairs or blind or walkers, etc. And he's going to do a pretty thorough analysis of the trails, slopes, materials, grade, etc. It should be very interesting. And then after that, it'll be up to the town to see if they want to make certain improvements to improve accessibility.
Any other report? How about a town council? Is there a town council report?
I was just looking at it because I didn't prepare, assuming Em would be here, but I don't think that we have met since we only had one meeting in August, more at the beginning,
Okay.
and the next meeting is on the 9th.
Very good. In that case, we will move on to public comments. Is there any general comments from the public tonight? All right. Item 8, extension for 121 Technology Drive. This is a request for extension to meet precedent conditions for site plan for improvements to light industry building at 121 Technology Drive. Brandon Kelly of RJ Kelly Company, property owner. Sean Smith, RJ Kelly applicant. This is map 204, lot 2 in the Office Research Light Industry District.
So Mr. Chair, I told the applicant that there was no need for them to come. But if for some reason the board does not want to approve it or has questions, then you can continue it and they'll come to another meeting. So this was for numerous site improvements and building improvements that the board approved about a year ago. And there were a number of precedent conditions. They've met everything except, I think the only thing is to put together a recycling plan. And they're meeting with Public Works, so they should have that done pretty soon. So it expired, they submitted in time, but it expired technically a few days ago, April 23rd. They've asked for a year, but you can give them whatever you think is appropriate and that'll be sufficient.
Yeah, I did want to ask them how much time they were actually going to need.
Oh, they won't need a year.
I know they won't need a year, but if we give them 4 months and they need 5.
Oh, it's just the recycling, so, that'd be fine if that's what you're inclined.
All right. Thoughts?
Just a question on that. What is covered by the recycling plan? I mean, I think I know off the top of my head what might be covered, but is it just normal recycling materials or something industrial?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it would just be the regular recycling materials. And they'll have to figure it out because they have half a dozen tenants in the building. So they'll have to figure out how to do that strategically.
I would expect that any tenant that has special recycling, that's a business item for them.
Thank you.
Welcome, Mixed Redux.
Thank you.
So you'll take over as council rep now?
Sure.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions, comments?
Just one more question on that. Are they working with the Public Works Department? Or
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
directly with Public Works?
Yeah,
they're connected.
DPW will approve a plan for them.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right, well, do we want to approve as requested?
I'm just wondering if we need a full year or if we could do,
That was my question. but
Okay.
that
They're
they-
flexible.
That they didn't
Yeah.
have to show up, so I can't ask them directly.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you want to, though, we can continue this and they'll come, but I think it's only the recycling plan and they're already speaking with Public Works, so, anything I'm sure will be adequate for them.
Well, I'll make a motion to extend the precedent conditions for 6 months for site plan improvements to light industry building at 121 Tech Drive. This is map 204, lot 2 in the Orly district.
I'll second that.
Second by M. Thank you. Any further discussion?
It seems reasonable. If they need more, they'll have to come ask.
Yeah, I think so. All right, all in favor of the motion as presented by Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. Thank you. All right. 6 months.
Yeah, that'll be more than adequate.
All right, item 9, public hearing, workforce housing zoning amendment. Amendment for proposed new Article 18.1 Workforce Housing Overlay District for the purpose of providing opportunities for the development of workforce and affordable housing and to ensure the availability of a diverse supply of rental housing. The article includes provisions regarding density, rent levels, types of dwelling units, other allowed uses, open space infrastructure, and other matters. The overlay district includes 2 areas, most of the office research district and a large parcel in the residence coastal district. And the second piece is the entire office and research light industry district located north of Mass Road. Related changes are made to several other articles, including the density allowance for workforce housing and conservation subdivisions. All right, the public hearing is open. Anyone who'd like to speak may come to the podium.
Hi, I'm Al Howland from Durham, and I'm speaking, of course, for myself, not for anything else that I represent. And it's been a really long time since I came here in January and introduced this to you guys. And I think I wrote a letter. I really appreciate all the work that went into it, particularly as you went through all the details of it. And I think you've done a really good job. I think one of the things that stands out to me, yesterday we did a tour of a project in Dover. And when we did the tour of the project in Dover, and one of the having kind of a monolithic project that's only workforce housing, but I think one of the things that is nice that's in there and maybe can be flushed through more is that it's not all the workforce $2,000 units that you can use some of the more expensive units to offset the cost of some of the lower units to come up with an averaging, and that therefore it really is not that monolithic. So in life terms, that could mean 2 LNAs who don't make a lot of money get a 2-bedroom apartment, and they're at a much lower rate. In fact, the New Hampshire rental survey that just came out said the average renter, median income of renter, what they could afford was only about $1,430 a month. And so they could have an apartment that was a lower cost, but that you could use a more expensive apartment, say for 2 RNs, or a nurse practitioner and an RN who could afford much more, and that the averaging of those apartments would still come out to 100% workforce. So that makes for diversity in your housing project, not a monolithic project. So I think that was one of the criticisms. I think the second thing to keep in mind is, and we saw it when we did, I heard a lot about zoning downtown. And we actually did zoning downtown, and nothing was built. So just because you do zoning, that's just the first step in any development project. You still actually have to develop the project. And I think keep in mind that we need, as we begin to add more and more restrictions to it, that it makes a project not viable. And so I sent to the planning board, or to the town planner, the Gateway project that's occurring in Exeter. It's right off of 27. It's, I think, about 220 units that are coming in. Whether you like the design or don't like the design, the reality is that it required TIF money from the town to actually build it, and it took a large Invest New Hampshire money also to get the curve to build the project. And the project that we were just at yesterday, which is Sophie Webb Banner Drive, in order to get the workforce units in, the townhouses in, you had to have market rate housing go in, 13 of them that are selling for like $550,000 to $600,000. So if you put a lot of restrictions in, you may feel good that you got the zoning in, but you're not going to build anything. And I think when you look around the state, there are not a lot of projects that are not using incentives to make them viable. And so I think we need to keep that in mind. So keeping our zoning, simple is just the first step. And I came here and said you had a lot of work ahead of you, but you're going to have a lot of work ahead of you still, because as the project comes forward, as all of you who've been around the table for a long time know, you're going to be dealing with the site plan and what the actual development looks like. And so I think there was a lot of wish lists, it's a really good idea of what you want in a project. But again, we need to keep in mind that a project needs to pencil out. And the more that we ask for, the more that we as a town need to be willing to give to make it economically viable. And so that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Does the person in Zoom want to speak?
Not that I can tell. There's 2 people now.
Very good. Anyone else here in the room?
Hi, I'm Beth Olshansky, but I'm here right now to speak for someone else who couldn't be here. So this is not me speaking. Good evening, Planning Board colleagues. I'm Dennis Meadows of 34 Laurel Lane in Durham, where I have had my residence for 35 years. Tonight, the hearings are touching on proposed changes which will, as they are refined, profoundly change the future character of Durham and the quality of life for people who live here. For that reason, I had intended to come tonight and offer some comments on the current status of discussions. However, personal issues have precipitously intervened, and I've had to ask a friend to convey my feelings to you tonight. I am sure this issue of housing and zoning will provide many opportunities for us to meet in friendly conversation over the coming years. But in the meantime, I did not consult with Beth in formulating these remarks, and they should be taken to reflect only my personal views. They are based on 50 years of professional experience in managing growth of complex systems. I'll be watching the conversation tonight passively on DCAT, so perhaps Dennis is one of the people on Zoom. That's just the introduction to his letter. Now I'm trying to scan down. Dear Planning Board members, a plan is a goal and a strategy for achieving it. You have been focused on the strategy for achieving change with all of the talk about zoning amendments and overlay districts. But what is the underlying goal? It certainly isn't constructing simply more low-cost housing. That's an impossible thing to attain, just like striving for less traffic on the seacoast by building new roads. All you do is build, spend a lot of money, push back the pressures a bit, and then, as a consequence, there's further growth and you're right back where you started from. It's no secret that the town has spent many person years of effort to achieve a more versatile, low-cost housing in Durham, with the result that we have less with more specialized and higher-cost housing in Durham. In order to get out of that trap, Durham needs to take a very different approach. It is so easy and so simple to frame your goals as simply wanting more, in quotes. It takes mastery and sophistication to put goals together in a way that combine the benefits with their inevitable cost. When you do that, we will begin to have a basis for an intelligent conversation about trade-offs. The town needs to create a few different realistic growth scenarios. Let's say, number one, growth leveling out over the next year, or number two, sustaining growth and ignoring later problems, or number three, experiencing really significant exponential growth. Each of these has consequences for the school system, for taxes, for quality of the environment, for recreational opportunities, and for cultural possibilities in the town. There is no unique right answer. However, for people in Durham, people in Durham should have, wait a minute, I'm sorry, let me start over. There is no unique right answer for how many people in Durham we should have. And if there were, most of us wouldn't agree. That's why you go with scenarios as a set of stories with which every one of us can find important aspects of our concern. I challenge the planning board to ask a few citizens, or maybe with the help of the administrator's office, to draft a couple of very simple scenarios. There is no pretense that they will be without error, nor any fantasy that everyone in town will accept one scenario. However, with each scenario, some people will gain and some people will lose, but it gives a point of reference. We know for sure that the quality of life in Durham is low, sparsely settled. And as it slowly grows, a growing population affords more opportunity. and then it starts to decline again as the population growth overloads the fiscal and environmental capacities of the town. There's no way to identify the precise turning point, but again, simply having a story about it will encourage people to get into conversation. We must not start Durham out on a profoundly important journey without having more complex and sophisticated understanding of the intended destination. Let us understand the issues we're discussing tonight are going to be and should be the focus of attention and town administrators for years. I'd rather that than keep making it up as we go along. Let's begin to build a foundation of consensus and analysis. When I get out of the hospital, I'd be delighted to consult with anyone who would want to pursue this idea. I've consulted many times for other kinds of socioeconomic systems. There are a few straightforward procedures, and it generates useful but not perfect or definitive knowledge. Thank you, Dennis Meadows. And I'll just say, this is not part of Dennis's comments. For those of you who don't know, in 1972, Dennis wrote Limits to Growth, which has been updated every decade for the last 5 decades. And unfortunately, his predictions from 1972, based on his modeling and systems thinking, have panned out to become true. I just went on Google. That book has been translated into 37 languages and has sold 12 million copies. So he does know a thing or two. Thank you. I'll be back later with my comments.
Next.
Hi, Janet Perkins Howland, 32 Frost Drive with 2 Fs. I wrote a letter last week to the planning board and the in the housing task force, so I won't reiterate that. I just wanted to highlight just a couple of things for the public hearing, which was, first of all, we all owe you a debt of gratitude for the work that you have done and apparently the work that is to come. It's a lot of complex work and really from the heart, thanks to all of you for all that you've done. I am distressed by some of the language that I hear people use about like who we want to invite into town and who we don't want to invite and these kind of people and not that kind. And I was absolutely antithetical to who we purport to be, which is we have the sign in our gateway saying that we're a welcoming community. So I think that we should think about how to do that with housing. So I think we talk about about instilling some vibrancy in the downtown, and I truly feel like we can't do that. People are sort of concerned about that the downtown is lacking some vibrancy, and I don't think that we can do that unless we start developing plans for diversifying housing so that we can have our workforce find places to live, but also about diversifying just the population in general. There's, besides the single-family housing, there's all kinds of wonderful opportunities for Durham to lead the way. And it's really exciting to think about that, how we can, there's so many like really very incredibly intelligent and forward-thinking people here. I think in terms of being a leader for sustainable and eco-friendly and the sort of transitional housing opportunities, like I said in my letter, Our Place New Hampshire, which is a organization for adults with disabilities. They have a new project going into Dover, and there's all kinds of other possibilities about transitional housing for, those with substance use disorder and those who were recently unhoused and so forth. So there's countless possibilities. So we're not just talking about workforce, and the ideas are really exciting to think about. And I would like us to think about being a leader in that instead of stagnating, quite frankly. In terms of the green spaces, I think that is incredibly important to all of us who live and here, that we want to preserve our green spaces, and I know we can do that. We have a lot of them, and we have examples of things that we, Underwoods, if I'm not mistaken, I think that used to be forest, the green space. It is possible to, to develop in a town like Durham and preserve spaces. I think that is it. I'd just like to end by saying that, and again, I'd like our town to be a leader in the efforts and not a town that's left behind by our surrounding communities. It's a town that has lots of riches, and I'd like to share some of them with a variety of folks who want a place to live and thrive here as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Jan.
Is there anyone in Zoom who'd like to speak?
I don't
No
think
hands?
so, but no hands right now, but
Okay.
somebody just dropped connection and got back in, so might as well take another in-person comment now, and we can
Very
wait
good.
for them to put up their hand if they want to.
Got it. Anyone else here in the room?
Hi, my name is Wes Dillon, and I live in Lee, New Hampshire. I'm here representing our nonprofit Four Rivers Project, our church, Four Rivers Church, which is incorporated in Durham. And it's in that role that I get to interface with a number of people and get to see the challenges and the opportunities in our region. And particularly in church, it's is one of the unique social institutions that brings a variety of people together. You have business owners, you have people who are just starting on their career, you have a whole great diversity. What I have seen from that perspective, and I'm speaking on behalf of our body, our church body, that there are a lot of people that would really like to live in Durham and would really would love to be able to work closer to the jobs that they have here in the Seacoast. And this type of affordable workforce housing would be a great benefit to a number of people that I know who would be in that type of situation. They're very excited about the possibility. We've helped several people to get into the tiny homes community that's in Dover, and we've just seen the benefit that's been to the people that have moved in there, but also to the business owners. We've seen the benefit that it has been to them to be able to have housing that is close by. So in my role here, I just want to be a cheerleader and encourage you to, with this work, I think this is a great idea. And on behalf of our body, that encourage you to pass the amendment as it is. So my wife and I, raising our 3 kids here, feel very fortunate that we get to raise our kids in this community. So thank you for your work and for what you're doing on this.
Thank you.
Next.
Joshua Meyerowitz, 7 Chesley Drive. Thank you again for your invitation for extensive public input, and I know that Michael made an effort to try to integrate as much as possible into his comments. So forgive me if I missed it, but I was disappointed not to see anything that I had offered last time, which seemed to be well received, at about 8:23 p.m. In the form of a more positive vision included for this project. So as you may recall, I left it to others to point out a lot of overall negative concerns, and many of which I agreed with, but instead I thought no one was really talking about, let's say those problems are addressed in some way. What would we really want in what is in scope and scale essentially a new Durham neighborhood, basically is big in households. If the idea on the table, or under the table, I guess, comes to fruition, then it's more than just planting in a bunch of households. And So I know you have a paradox here, maybe that's part of the challenge, that we're talking about an overall zoning, and it's not tied to any particular project and has to address all those. And yet we all know that there is an underlying project and a site and developers in mind. And that, so the challenge is to figure out, as I'll mention again, some specific things that could make this like a great neighborhood, really. To put that in a way that allows or encourages, or more than encourages, requires at least some of those things to happen. So I agree, as I've said before, that it's overwhelmingly refreshing to work with developers who have a good reputation and reflect our community's values. And I certainly understand the Randolph's concern about how adding too many rules and limits makes it more complex for them to do that, and the viability of the project. And I agree with them that in the absence of something like what they generally have in mind, that was the Keefe property will probably become a few multi-million-dollar homes. And also that it's unlikely that a farmer will come forward to adopt this property and make it into a functional farm. So, but nevertheless, I think we need to see something more than optional suggestions or preferences. And it also, in terms of the welcoming community that Janet mentioned, putting in all 3-bedroom units will not be, if that's how it turns out, would not be as positive as an addition to Durham as we could have. And this ties in with also Robin Mower's letter about inclusionary housing, and that some kind of requirement for mixing of units makes this much more of a neighborhood than just a temporary place where people with certain needs in terms of bedrooms move in for a while. If you want to attract a new single UNH faculty member or a new single graduate student, then they probably not afford a 3-bedroom, but they might want a studio. And then if they get married, a 1-bedroom. And if they start to have kids, then they go there. So if they're going to be able to stay in this, if it's really going to function as a new neighborhood, then you really need a diversity of units. And to negotiate, figure out a plan that facilitates that to happen, because also that means that people can then downsize after the kids are in school and stay there without adding to the tuition of the school system. So, important. And also, I tried to work with all the objections in the past, both times I've spoken about this, such as the cultural land with the 60% conservation, and the Randolphs were up for this, of having some community gardens and growing food there. So that's the type of thing, I think that mechanism of arrangement is very important. And again, I mentioned it many times, but I didn't see it, and it could be any property that is developed to emphasize connection by foot and bike, as well as safe car access to the safest route. So in this case, in that property, it would be more to 108, get to 108 rather than Route 4. Think about even if taking bus transportation on Route 4, how do you get from one side of the street to the other? Would there be a light? Would there be a pedestrian overpass? With the safe crossing across the Route 4, again, with the project that we know is underlying but not specifically mentioned, would there be some way to integrate activity on the properties? I think I've heard that 11 acres on the Harmony Homes property are also conserved. They almost look like farms growing right now there. Could there be some cross-property activity? Recent studies, by the way, have shown that people who seem to be in vegetative, that 25% of them, when you ask them to imagine certain activities, have identical brain waves to the people, you and me and everyone around this room. And we know that interaction between very ill people with dementia, when they engage with young people or with music. I mean, there are all kinds of possibilities here for a very dynamic neighborhood, which it could include children and graduate students and new faculty, if there were things that kept them there. I mentioned last time not only a recreation room, which made it into the minutes, but also for graduate students with kids, a quiet, like a library kind of space, But some combination of, I mean, I think we really need to require a mix of the size of units of some formulation, but also encouraging all of these other types of things. And again, it may be a stretch, but we don't know they'll stay in the same ownership, but the Harmony Homes is on waterfront property. Could there be at least places to sit and view the waterfront? Could there be, I mean, this could be like the best neighborhood in Durham if it was thought of creatively with a connection. Right now, Riverwoods is like in its own world. If there's an exit there for walking and hiking to Riverwoods, to get to the Riverwoods sidewalks, I measured the distance from the Harmony Homes driveway to the exit onto 108. It's only a half a mile. And so, but on Route 4, it feels like a dangerous place to walk and bike. But through that bike trail that was cut, a plan for a bike and hiking trail that was stopped, I believe. Well, I won't attribute it to who stopped it, but there was a plan to get to and through the Keefe property that did not happen to get to Newington and Portsmouth. But that kind of connection where people who cannot yet drive or who don't have access to a car can walk a half a mile into town. I mean, it's nothing. To go to work, to shop, it would pull the people in that new neighborhood into downtown to eat. I mean, what a fun to walk into town to eat rather than have to drive. And it means that you could have something to drink and not have to be concerned about getting home and so forth. So I mean, there are all kinds of possibilities there. And so, in a sense, I guess my summary comment is that I agree with people who are concerned about the scale of it, as Beth Olshansky wrote in her letter. But in a sense, I think the project is like too grand in some ways and too small and imaginative. At least play out the scenarios of what could make this a very interesting and dynamic neighborhood where people would come there and stay there and be able to move within it and have a mix of people so that you do have that tradition of welcoming people of different financial abilities and family status and live together in a diverse new neighborhood, which again would bring younger people to these planning board meetings as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Anyone else?
Good evening, John Randolph from One Stagecoach Road, and I apologize, you guys are probably really tired of seeing me come up here on this topic and everything. Maggie and I want to continue to place our support behind this regardless of who ends up doing the project. We strongly believe that it is an important part of the community. We've had a lot of conversations with residents across the Durham area. A lot of great feedback. I would say that it's amazing how open the board has been to feedback, the ideas. Every time we do this, the project gets a little bit better. The idea of the project, or acceptance that people understand that the parts of it that needs to be put together. And the comments that you made and stuff, I'm sure behind the scenes are getting added to a lot of things and everything. So I think it's important for everybody to feel that they've listened to, because this is a really dramatic change, and change scares people. The reality is that not knowing who's moving into Durham and moving into the area does scare people. And I think, even if it got to the point that the planning board set up something that was outside of this time zone, maybe somebody that can't come to 7 o'clock at night could sit down and discuss the issues, meet with, whether Michael, you hosted or something like that, and allow members of the community to kind of bring up their concerns, talk about it at a level so that you don't have to sit here until 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, every other Wednesday night. But I do think that there's a lot of good feedback. We had some great conversation 2 weeks ago right out in the lobby with people just asking questions and what would it look like and those sort of things. So I think the communication is really important. I think it may, moving into some sort of an informal hosted thing that people could have some input, could have some feedback, could ask questions. I also, support the suggestion, the idea that limiting the number of 3 bedrooms, I think would give a lot of people some idea of what the scope is out there. I firmly believe that no one's going to come along and buy it and turn it into a farm, but I think the opportunity to partner with the agricultural committee and look at opportunities to grow things out there to still make a use of the land that would contribute to that aspect of things is very, very real. So I think there's a lot of room to move forward in a very thoughtful way with the input of the community, maybe partially done outside of your time so that those things can come to you a little bit more succinctly. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, John.
I do want to take a moment to, you go ahead and sit. This is, when you look at the workforce housing projects that have occurred throughout the state, most of them don't have any 3 bedrooms. It's a lot more effective and efficient to build the smaller workforce housing units than it are, something with 3 bedrooms. One of the things we did discuss in the past was whether or not we should require a particular mix. And that was more in line to it was more to make sure we had some 3 bedrooms included as opposed to trying to limit them. So I hope that information would be useful to allay some of the concerns about having nothing but 3 bedrooms in one of these developments.
Now we have someone on Zoom.
We have a hand in Zoom, all right.
It's David Richmond.
Mr. Richmond?
Thank you. My name is David Richmond. I am at 16 Cowell Drive in Durham, and we have lived here for 36 years, if I'm counting correctly, and we are very lucky to live here. I'm going to be brief. I'm not a planner. My gratitude to and respect for all of you on the planning board immense. We have a moral obligation, I think, and it's a moral imperative that everyone deserves a place to live. And there is no one, I want to add my voice to what I think Wes said and what Janet said. There is no one who should not be welcomed in this community. I'm a teacher of theater and a director of Shakespeare, and I want briefly to invoke Shakespeare. King Lear talks about the poor naked wretches wheresoe'er you are that bidless storm. How shall your houseless heads and unfed sides, your looped and windowed raggedness defend you against seasons such as these? Lear says, I have taken too little care of this. We in Durham have an obligation, a moral obligation, to take great care of this. We must provide housing for all those who need it. Thank you for your attention.
That was great. I love the point being driven through Shakespeare. That's awesome. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Matt Komanchuk, 1 Thompson Lane. I'm sorry I'm not better prepared. I ask you to bear with me a little bit. First, I wanted to endorse many of the criticisms and comments that have been made earlier tonight and also on August 14th. Specifically, or in particular, the comments of Robin Mower, Beth Olshansky, Mr. Sandberg, Professor Meyerowitz. I also agree with the gentleman who just spoke about the moral obligation to provide adequate housing and a dignified place to live for residents. That said, I am opposed to the current iteration of your draft amendment for a number of reasons, and I honestly found it challenging to. I find that there are so many. It's such a complex issue, and there's so many problems with what has been done to date that it's hard to kind of cull or distill my opposition into a few main points. But nonetheless, I've tried to do that. First of all, I agree with the sentiment that I have the sense that the state of New Hampshire has said jump, and Durham has said how high, without really questioning what the sort of underlying policy or without bringing to bear sort of the recent history of what could be arguably overdevelopment taking place in Durham. Other factors. I believe that Durham has a duty to push back on the estimates that are provided in the RKG report and to come up with some, let's say, defensible estimates of what are, rather than simply accepting estimates that are based on what has been deemed by several people to be very flawed and faulty data. I'm also opposed, I feel that generally speaking, while the Housing Task Force, has been active on this project since 2021, late 2021, I feel as though if you really look at what the Housing Task Force has produced, it's actually very little. And there's been an incredible sort of lack of rigor in terms of the analysis that's been done. And if you ask for certain information about, it's just basic information that would be sort of essential for any study of the issue, people they direct you not to anything that they've produced, they direct you to the RKG report. The RKG report often lacks what they're telling you actually exists in the RKG report. So the RKG report is incomplete, and even the RKG, we know that their response to, I believe it was Councillor Friedrich said that she was disappointed in their findings and that she expected a sort of more sophisticated recommendations. And they said, well, you know what, the budget was limited. We really didn't have the capacity to go there. And so both the lack of rigor at the Housing Task Force level and also the lack of rigor or the lack of reliable information in the RKG report, I think, give me pause about moving forward with such an important and broad amendment that affects much of, several parcels in Durham in significant ways. And, if you don't have to take my word for it. I think Jim Lawson put together a pretty devastating critique of the RKG report in its initial, when it was initially presented in draft format. And I know RKG did try to patch up the report a little bit, but again, it said, well, without being paid more to do more extensive analysis, there's only so much we could do. So, unfortunately, those two, the task force and the RKG report should be sort of pillars upon which this zoning amendment, this proposed zoning amendment should be based. But unfortunately, I see them as both somewhat shaky. Another thing that I'm bothered by, and this has been mentioned previously, and I'll just touch on it, is that for a long time there seemed to be this. I don't know if it was both it's often difficult to distinguish the planning board from the housing task force since there's so much overlap. But I believe that for an extended period of time, and record will show this, that these boards were enamored with the idea, the concept of brokering a one seller to one buyer transaction between the owners of Harmony Homes and the Keefe property. And the record shows that there's a lot of mention of those two parties, and that was really a primary focus for an extended period of time. The understanding at that time was that rezoning of that single parcel would not be spot zoning. Subsequently, the attorney weighed in, the town attorney, the town attorney weighed in saying that, well, this could be spot zoning. And that leads me to sort of another concern that I have, which is that the reaction of the planning board to the opinion that zoning or rezoning the Keefe parcel would be spot zoning was to throw other parcels into the mix so that the spot zoning issue would go away. And that just seems like, that seems entirely reckless in my opinion. It just doesn't seem, and I don't believe those other parcels, and I believe the record shows this, that those other parcels were not examined thoroughly in the same way that, that much attention was devoted to the Keefe property. But I think a lot less was devoted to the other parcels. And so that's another thing that I find somewhat troubling. And And underlying, I think, this whole process is sort of a speeding ahead unnecessarily out of a mortal fear that the Keefe property will go to another use. And I'll admit that I could be wrong about, perhaps the Keefe property is the end-all be-all. Perhaps the Keefe property is, without the Keefe property, Durham is doomed, right, if we don't redevelop that. But I don't think so. I think you somehow fell into this belief that, the Keefe property was, it was so essential to the future of a diverse housing stock in Durham that I lost my train of thought, but that you went with too much speed and sort of curtailed analysis. And also, I guess, for me, the cherry on top, and I'm guessing that you may not appreciate this either as a planning board, but it's kind of disconcerting when you have a housing task force that's been working for 3 years and they continue to work, I believe. They've been working for about 3 years on this issue, and the planning board has put substantial time and effort into it. And then at the 11th hour, you have the town administrator writing a memo saying, oh, your approach is all wrong. You need to be focusing on the downtown. After 3 years of focusing on other things, I wouldn't appreciate that. But it just goes to show how disorganized the town administration seems to be on this particular issue. So,
I'd like to address the last point.
That's not correct.
Thank you.
Todd Selig was not saying we're going down the wrong path. He's saying he'd like us to looking at revitalization of the downtown as a separate issue.
In addition to this particular amendment, were the words he used, in addition to.
Counselor, would you like to respond with regards to the town council's position on the RKG report?
So, I think that it's true that that I personally had criticism of the RKG report, that I felt that there were, that it was more simplistic than I had hoped for. And I think that some additional data was brought to light that was helpful, and we saw some improvements going from the first draft to the second draft. But I think that, there's also some useful information in there. There's no question that there is a lack of affordable housing in Durham and in the area. That's something that the town council does agree on, and that's one of the stated goals from the town council, is to work to try and create an affordable housing ordinance in this next year. But there's some, I think, how we get to that point in a way that also aligns with our other goals is the question that we've been trying to answer, and we're continuing to try to answer.
Thank you.
Chair, can I just because you brought up some great points, so just, I guess, while we're all together, if I could just comment on a few of those. The first on the RKG report. So I think you could just look at the market as a fairly quick proxy for affordability, and it's judging that every day. So the market's already, evaluating this on a daily basis, and has been for years. So you have both the market telling you something, and then you have the RKG report telling you a slightly different story in a different way, but I think they both point to the same conclusion. So if you were just to look at the mean price of housing in Durham over the last 20 years compared to other towns, maybe in other states that are similar, you would see that for whatever reason, the price of housing in Durham is escalated higher than in other areas. So you have the market telling you one thing, and then you have RKGs telling you in a different way. I think RKG is an excellent report. That's one. The second is there's a policymaking body, and then there's businesses, and I run a business in Portsmouth. It's very difficult for my employees to find housing. I know other people that run businesses. It's almost impossible for their employees to find housing. So in a lot of cases, I think this impetus to do this and to solve this problem is being driven by people that have employees that can't find housing. So maybe the policy making is a little slow on that, but the people that are trying to have employees that don't have to commute 90 minutes away are trying to impact this. And so maybe policy is sort of a little bit lagging, but I think it's trying to catch up. And, you know, you could open up Zillow, and I think in about a very short amount of time, you could quickly kind of scope out yourself if there's an affordability crisis.
I don't, just to be,
You need to
You'd have to
microphone.
speak up.
Thank you for responding to me. I don't think that I said that there wasn't an affordability crisis. I know that's well demonstrated. But I think that when you're planning a project like this, you need to have more granular information. And so, you know, you need to know who you're building it for. And I don't think really that question has been adequately answered. And one thing that you may want to review is that so 2 years into the Housing Task Force process, in late 2023, the charge or the mission of the Housing Task Force was changed. And it was, why it was changed at that point, I don't know. I don't know because the original charge is not publicly available. But the point is that at that junction, sorry. Lost my train of thought. They changed their approach to basically increase, the focus was going to be for outreach to future Durham residents. Future Durham residents. It's quite an amorphous concept.
This is what Lee was looking at, sir? You were talking about Lee's charge and referring, they're concerned about Durham residents, or you're circling
No, I
us
wasn't
back?
talking about Lee. I never mentioned Lee.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, you did.
Oh, I did?
Sorry, you must have misspoke.
Okay, I'm sorry. No, so the Housing Task Force in late 2023 changed its mission, and they changed it to focus more on outreach to future Durham residents. And if you kind of look at the details of that, it's clear that they don't really understand, or it's very difficult to get a grasp, and since nobody has a crystal ball, determining what Durham's future, basing recommendations on such an amorphous concept that is so difficult to define and determine is, you know, it's just not a good idea. And so I guess I agree with you. Clearly there's a problem in terms of affordability, but I don't think that it's enough to just sort of answer that question at a very macro level when you're dealing with such an important rezoning. So that's, I guess, my response.
Thank you.
So, Matt, there's only so much in our sphere of influence here. So you said there's a lot out there, a lot of criticism and comments. Do you have anything specific for the amendment? The words that are in front of us here, is there anything there that you might offer some insight?
No, I think that when you have the underlying, when this amendment is based on very shaky,
but it's not.
Well, in my opinion is, and that's my opinion. My opinion is that I'll direct you to go to the minutes of the November 13th Housing Task Force, or go to the meeting itself. I mean, go to Jim Lawson's comments on February, I believe it was February 19th. There are clearly problems with those two pillars, and so that's all I'm saying is, I think that this amendment proposal is based on sort of faulty or weak analysis. I don't think there's a lot of meat there on the bone. That's all I'm saying. And so I'm not going to go to wordsmith a document that I think is based on shaky pillars.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak?
Beth Olshansky, Packers Falls Road, so now I'll speak for myself. Thank you again for the last meeting's discussion. It was very enlightening. And I did send a follow-up letter, so you've all read that and sort of know my position. So I'm not here to repeat myself, but I did have a couple other thoughts. First of all, Josh paints a very attractive picture of what could happen out on the Keefe property. I think we might have our first tenant. Well, you got to downsize. And in the initial discussions, we were focusing on rezoning one property. First, it was just moving the boundary, then it was the overlay. And then all of a sudden, we're talking about much more land. And as Matt sort of said, to the public, to me, it also feels like Orly got thrown in. Like, Jim Lawson did a very detailed analysis for one property, I believe. Even though I didn't agree with his findings, because I do think when you open up 50 or 100 empty spaces in the Oyster River School District, you're going to have more than 0.5 students per building. But still, he did a detailed analysis. Now, when we look at the Orly lot, and thank you, Michael, for suggesting taking Mast Road out of the mix, because, that helped. But still, I don't know how many parcels there are left in the northern part of Orly. I wonder if you've taken the overlay as you've placed it on that land and done a build-out analysis. It seems important, if you're bringing this to the town council, the public want to know, what are the impacts? What is the potential for putting that overlay across those major area in Orly? Yes.
I can respond to that.
Okay, I'd love to hear it.
Okay, so everyone needs to keep in mind that when we feel there's enough, we shut off the valve.
How do you do that?
Done the same way we did with the student housing downtown, same way we did with we simply go back in and we change the zoning again to remove the workforce housing overlay. I mean, the idea that the entire overlay district is going to become workforce housing, that's never going to happen, because we're not going to let it happen.
How does that align with the state pressures that say you have to have this much land in workforce housing, which was my understanding of why you did move to Orly?
At that point, we'll have all those properties that are qualifying as workforce housing.
And how do you define enough?
That will be something that will be, we will get a feel for. The town council will provide feedback to us like they did with the request to get this passed in the first place, right? We tweaked, how many times did we tweak unit sizes in the downtown area between 2012 and 2018, right? That was a constant give and take to try to find the right balance, to slow down development that we didn't like, right? It'll be the same thing here. We can tweak the overlay district. I mean, the housing issue is going to be an ongoing thing that we're constantly addressing. This is our first step. It's not the final step.
If the motivation for bringing the overlay into Orly was mainly to address the concern about spot zoning, I'm curious why the board didn't instead look at the downtown, like Mill Plaza, Church Hill areas.
Because those areas are already highly developed. And it's the way the economics is going to work in those areas is going to be to use a different method for dealing with housing in those areas.
Other than an overlay, you mean? But are you looking at?
Other than this overlay.
Other than
Other
this
than
overlay.
this
It could be
We
an
might use
overlay, but it would have to be.
a different overlay
yeah.
perhaps, but.
There are different challenges. There are definitely infrastructure challenges that are very challenging in that. And so this overlay would not fit in those. And so this one really is more designed for a more rural setting.
And then my follow-up question would be, I am pleased to know you're thinking about another sort of overlay that would involve downtown.
Definitely.
If you have the Keefe property and you have plans to do downtown overlay, why do we need the overlay in Orly?
Go ahead.
You go ahead.
Well, in part because of the state legislation requiring, X amount of the available residential zoned areas to be open to this sort of use.
But Orly's not residential.
But it is with this change.
I see.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a fair question to reexamine. Orly was one of the districts that was identified in the RKG report as a potential site for workforce housing because of the town sewer availability, because of there are open parcels there. And UNH's West Edge project proposal is in the Orly district. Granted, we're also looking at some planned development for that, so there may be other ways to work to create workforce housing in that area as UNH looks to develop it, which we would be able to do because if it's a private development, then we would have zoning over that. So I think it's a fair question to bring up, but there are some ways in which it aligns with possible workforce housing uses, and it would make sense to require the 60% open space minimum there, whereas 60% open space in Church Hill or downtown would not make sense. So we'd have to definitely come up with different requirements for those zones. But there may be some mechanisms, and it was very last minute, but I emailed one to the planning board to possibly discuss. There may be some mechanisms to include kind of an automatic turnoff so that if a certain number of housing units are met or created out of this ordinance, then the ordinance kind of automatically loses its density bonus. So I think that there are ways for the board to continue discussing all of the comments we've heard from the public and to try and address some really valid points.
Can I just ask a couple
Yeah.
questions? So I read your email, and the email, as I read it, would like to remove basically, I'm not everything south of Route 4 in Orly, but the large block that is currently, let's say, farmland in Orly. Is that accurate?
Yeah, well, as Michael put a new map up, didn't that remove the Mast Road?
Right now, this public hearing's dealing with what we
Okay.
sent a month ago. There have been no official changes.
Okay.
I'm just wondering what
Yes.
your feedback would be, just while we have you, in terms of what what you would like to see not included in this on the Orly district.
Yeah, Well, anything along that Mass Road Gateway, are you
And
familiar
this is
with?
the Mass Road coming down to the left of Main Street,
Okay,
going down
so you
here.
already have the lodges completely built out.
Lodges
You
is here,
have
TC's is here.
UNH farmland.
This is UNH, this is TC's.
You know, so there's a very small amount of land, but it is mostly agricultural. It is open. I don't agree with, if we're getting into wordsmithing kinds of things, I don't agree with a 100-foot buffer to allow a 4-story building in the middle of a field in our rural zone. I all have the smart growth principles and the transect and all the things that Durham has talked about for decades as a part of our master plan. Still have those in the back of my mind as things that we should try to accommodate as we figure out where to put things. So did I answer your question?
I think you did.
Yes, all of Mast Road, I'd rather,
Anything
see-
abutting Mass Road,
yeah.
yeah.
And I'm not clear on, well, I see where the Route 4 exchanges and all that. Can you put your cursor on Route 4? Is it, if you were to remove Mast Road, the land that remains in the Orly would be where?
It's this block, which I think is up here is the Technology Drive.
Yeah,
And then
that's
there's
pretty
a
much
small-
all in that
There's a
mustard
small
color.
island over here.
It's that northern part of that.
Yeah, it's the northern part of Main Street there.
And what kind of land is that? A mix of forest and field? Well,
Primarily, yeah, wooded for the
And
most part.
significant slope, I might add, as well, which is
It's-
going to inhibit any sort of development.
It's the Beach Hill, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's,
Oh,
you know the
also on
Beach Hill.
other
Yeah.
side, though, that way.
So I read your email, and I just wanted to because we have some printed papers going around, but I just thought it would be useful as
Yeah.
well, just to see it in the GIS, just so we could all
Yeah.
just
yes.
visualize it.
Thank you. So, I appreciate hearing the thought process. In my mind, in the letter was sort of let's start small and then grow out if we need to, whereas Paul, you're saying, let's lay out a larger map and then
If you
hit the
remember,
button.
if you remember back in January, February, it was screamed at us that an overlay district was the proper way to do this. But an overlay district must be large. It has a minimum size to it that needs to represent different parts of the town.
And if you weren't doing an overlay, if you
Well,
decided
it's too
to
late.
change the boundary?
At this point, what's on the table is an overlay district.
But
It's
this is-
unlikely that we'll go back to that.
This is also better. I think that, I think the original plan could have worked, which was just rezoning a portion of the Keefe, most of the Keefe property to OR, which would not have been spot zoning, and then allowing a workforce housing in OR. I think that could have worked, but frankly, I think the overlay is a better approach. And the planning board is expanding to the west for several reasons. And as Paul says, the overlay district really needs to be bigger than a few parcels. And the RKG report also recommended 2 general areas around the Keefe property and around the Drive. And while the Keefe property is certainly a good possibility, there are a handful of other good-sized parcels that could work. And there's water and sewer around Technology Drive. But as Paul says, it's absolutely correct, and you know it. The town has really wrestled with multifamily and rejiggered zoning every couple of years. And if we get a project, whether it's a Keefe property or somewhere else, we're going to learn something from that. And the town may say, let's modify our zoning. They might even remove it. But I'm sure, given this is Durham, this is going to be an ongoing adjustment. And this will not be overwhelming, because if there was a lot, the town would reevaluate.
In the actual draft of this ordinance, will there be, as Councilor Friedrichs suggested, an eject button? I mean, is that something you'd consider writing into that
That's something that
document?
still need to discuss.
Okay. Thank you. I find these conversations very helpful. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any hands in Zoom?
Nope.
I don't see anyone who'd like to speak. Shall we wrap it up?
Sure.
I'll move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
Second, discussion?
So if any significant change in front of us would require us to reopen that public hearing, correct?
Or
Start a
re-advertise,
new one.
re-advertise.
It's a new one.
Okay.
You want to keep it open, or you want to?
I think there's an argument for that, but
I'd like to close.
No, but you would need to, if you make significant changes now.
I understand that.
We would
that
need a
is-
new hearing.
We would
Yeah,
still.
we couldn't just continue.
We can't just continue it if we make changes.
I see.
So the question is, if we're willing to deliberate and start making changes, we should close the public hearing.
Right, because
Okay.
we can't leave it
Right.
open, deliberate, make changes, and then, yeah, I see. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. We had a second, I believe.
Yes, we
Correct.
did. Erica seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, that was unanimous. So,
Could we recess for just a few moments?
I'd be perfectly fine with that.
Thank you.
We're going to
Couldn't wait
recess
that long.
for
I had to go.
a few minutes.
I've been trying to hydrate because I really exercised today, and then I realized, wow, I can't even wait till next, or whatever was going on.
All right, so it is 8:25. We can spend a little time talking. There's definitely, I don't think we're going to get through our whole discussion tonight, even if we tried.
No.
So it really is going to boil down to how much time we want to put aside tonight on this topic so that we still get to the rest of our business that we have. We could just say, we'll take it up as at a fresh meeting, which might be easier rather than to start something and then have a hard time finding a stopping point.
I think it would be good if we were able to go through our notes and think about it. But I think I would caution the board that I don't want to get into a complete rewrite of this. I think what we have really is solid. And I think we need to be careful not to just segue a different way because people don't like it. But I do feel that there are some doable suggestions and comments that we have, and I think that there is definitely some areas that we can tweak to make them more public friendly.
Areas of improvement.
Yeah.
So maybe, perhaps, Mr. Chairman, along those veins, if we could just go around and if each person might list an area or two so that we all know what we're thinking of and we can give that some thought as well between now and our next meeting.
I was thinking along the same lines, so we'll say
So
two,
9, 10?
maybe top. We'll go around, there's no debate, no discussion, you're simply going to say, these are my top 1 or 2 items that I think, or maybe I'll draw it at 3. 3 things that I think we should tweak.
Okay.
Sound reasonable? All right, who would like to start?
What side's going to start?
I could start if you'd like me to start. All right.
Oh, let's go. You want to start that way?
No, I was pointing at him.
Oh, you.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
You want
to go?
You're way beyond your years.
All right, I will start since this is, I would believe we should, we do need to tweak the map and make it a little smaller. That's the only thing I'm really big on. The rest of the stuff is, I could live with it the way it is without much change, but I'm not saying and I just have a few things that I don't think we should be changing, but yeah, that's it for me.
Okay.
I'll go.
Sally?
I would agree that we can tweak the map. I think we can get, we need to reduce the footprint of where we're laying this as far as the Orly. So tweaking the map. And I would say the other thing, I think that where we have some room, we could, an easy lift would be to really define the amount of 3 bedrooms that we are looking for, since it does seem to be a hot topic. I don't have a problem limiting that, and I think that it actually, wouldn't be a problem. Everything else, I'm really happy with. The question I would have is about the agricultural uses, and perhaps, I don't know how we could encourage a developer to work with the ag, with a plan for, farms, or not farms, but, personal gardening, community gardens, that's the word. I think that would be the best use of the agricultural land.
Peyton?
So I agree that on the Orly, when I was looking at it last night, I kind of came to I would probably just go north of Route 4 on Orly, but you could include some of these lots that are carried across the road. So that was one, is I would reduce Orly. I think James Bubar's comment about just flat out including the church specifications instead of referencing church, I think that makes a lot of sense. Just pull it right on through.
Churchill.
And in case Churchill changes, you don't have to reference it. You just it's kind of like just pulling the code on in, you just use it.
I actually had already instructed Mr. Barrett to create a new column on the metrics
Okay.
slide to eliminate that. It wasn't really a change, it's just changing the way we were presenting the information.
I thought the electrical inclusion was interesting, but I would not include the electrical thing there. It seems specific.
Stick with what
So-
changed.
Yeah.
So then the only.
What's the electrical?
That was the, yeah, so in terms of things I would change, that was about it. I would scope down orally, and I would include James Bubar's comments to include the definitions of that.
That's
Don't use Churchill, just
Don't
pull
use
in
the word
exactly what you
Churchill.
need.
Right,
Use the
right.
numbers.
I'm thinking pragmatically, and I think that it's going to be really hard to pass this ordinance through the town council with the Ag Commission, the Energy Committee, and two councilors' opinions that they don't understand why ownership models aren't included. So I think a draft is going to have a lot more chances of being passed at the town council if recommendations from the Ag Committee are worked in. We haven't gotten specific change requests from them yet. If ones from the Energy Committee are included, and if we revisit the ownership option.
Heather?
The map portion, I think that's, everybody's probably going to agree that that can be tweaked. You know, we had that whole sentence in there on the mix of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, et cetera. And I don't know if that sentence still is a good one, but we had wanted to develop some flexibility. So I don't know, I'm a little 50-50 on that one. And the possibility of ownership, I think, could be added to be flexible so that the developer can or cannot, if they choose not to, then they choose not to. I think that the development that we toured in Dover is a good example where they were able to put in really good quality townhomes, and they were able to help support the cost of their infrastructure because they had to build the road themselves, and they needed the market rate homes to support that. And
You don't have to sell it tonight.
oh,
You
sorry,
just have to
yeah.
list it.
Sorry.
It's a good model, though, to consider.
Yeah.
So I'll agree that that could be in there.
So it was ownership option, and what was the other one?
The map.
The map.
Tweaking the map.
Rob?
I think a bunch of the comments were about like, what are we building? And some of that can be like very subjective. So I think the incentive list is maybe where that comes out, and maybe we flesh that out more. In other words, people are saying we want these features and this vibe in the place. A lot of that's not even going to come out until we actually have a developer saying, here's my plan. But it's a common thing that everybody's saying. So if we have a way to say in here, yes, we know that there's a smart way to build that includes really good elements, and either we need a standards list, which we may have somewhere else, or we need an incentives
I
list to
think
say we're
we're-
going to do those things.
I think we're mixing site plan regs with zoning.
That's
And
the
that's the
discussion you're
the
hearing.
issue, is they're two
Yeah.
separate things, and, but.
So how do we
Maybe
give
we'll discuss it.
reassurance to people that, hey, maybe we need, just explain that, like the site regs is where this comes out.
But within the.
Let's discuss that
Yeah.
at a later date.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think there's strategies there.
We could also, we have these architectural, which do not apply
later
in these
date.
districts, but they exist.
Richard?
Guardrails. So we heard, and I brought this up some time ago. I was concerned about what is the impact? What are the other towns doing? If Lee and Madbury are doing something on a larger scale than what we're doing, and we find out 4 or 5 years from now, oh my goodness, there's not 50, 60 kids coming in, there's 200 kids coming in. And I would think we'd know that. We'd know that along the way. But I think that we could incorporate some guardrails within the zoning ordinance to kind of self-impose it, turning down. and I can talk specifically next time.
Okay.
Wait, I didn't, what kind of guardrails? I didn't understand.
Guardrails.
Guardrails to
Development that would tax the infrastructure in the school system.
Erica?
Same comments about the map, and with regards to the 3 bedrooms, like, I'm seeing that there was already an edit, right? May not exceed 1/3 of the total number of dwelling units. So that, in a sense, has already been addressed, to my understanding? Even though
What paragraph are you looking at?
So am I looking at page 6 of 16?
No, well, that's just my suggestion.
Well,
Suggestion, okay.
Yeah,
so-
right now it says a mix of.
Okay, so we're going to discuss that. So I'm in support of that number, but perhaps we can discuss a little bit more. So that's point 2. On a completely random note today, it's just my own opinion. I think it was discussed by one of the town members regarding having paths like throughout the property that can be accessed by the public and things like that. I think that's a great idea, but I would never make it a requirement. I don't know if we ever could or something like that, but it's like,
See, that is one of the problems with people talking about the Keefe property, right? We're passing an ordinance for the whole overlay district. Whatever we write has to be appropriate for every piece of property in the overlay district. If somebody's got a 4-acre lot stuck up on Technology Drive, does it make sense to require them to run sidewalks all the way down Main Street? And so we got to be really careful about those types of requirements.
yeah, so in my mind, that's something that like I would not require if they want to do it. But at the end of the day, I also think like they're the owners of that property at the end of the day. If they want to put in those extra paths for the benefit of Durham, that's great. But to all the additional planning of putting a path through potentially the middle or the side of their property, I wouldn't make that a requirement at the end of the day. That's my own opinion on that.
Thank you, everyone. We'll have.
The sale versus rent only, do we need to chat about that? How, that's something we're going to talk in the next.
That's something we're going to talk about. I will, in terms of, I did a little research, and this is based on Mr. Friedman's request on the, where's his notes? Where's those notes? And it was interesting. The place he's referencing that has the ownership models, that's municipal funded housing. I don't think Durham's ready to get into municipal funded housing.
No.
So, and that's one of the reasons why that model works, is because the town and county are owners of the property.
But there may be other models we could
The
consider.
one that I sent out that was written by New Hampshire Housing was not written to be town or municipal
Agreed,
owned.
agreed.
So
That
that's
one I
another
just had
model.
trouble getting through. It was so verbose, and also it did seem complicated. But
I think we
we
can-
can nut bolt that one
We can discuss.
at our
it.
next meeting.
I think there is some pathways forward with that.
But I think the question we need to ask ourselves is it going to be worth it? I mean, we're close right now. We could have something that could be submitted. If we start chasing too many brand-new things, we will miss the requested deadline of the end of this year for getting something to town council.
Well, I think
We also want to send something forward that has a good chance of being passed. though,
I
too.
think if we can explain why it's missing certain elements that people want to see and say we're going to address them in a later phase, I would hope that the town council would say, this is good, I'll take it, as opposed to waiting for something that's perfect, which I'm never going to see.
I agree with you,
That's the
Chair.
argument that I would like to make on them. Like I said, I'm hoping 1 or 2 nights worth of work gets us to a new public hearing, which then gets us giving the town council something in December.
well,
Sooner than that.
Well, that's what we said.
No,
3 months
because the
ago.
town, only if we decide, yeah, well, it could be 1, 2, public hearing, we're already into the mid to late October.
And then it has to go on
That's
the
a
schedule
perfect
for town
timeline.
council.
Yeah.
And by the holiday, we has to be before Thanksgiving.
Or you're going to be in
So,
budget
So,
too. You're going to be in budget too.
yeah,
I agree with you. I think we should keep it I think we're very close. And I think if we had another meeting and we were able to then have a public hearing or public comment on that, I'd like to do our job and provide something to the town council and then let them, it's then in their court and they can provide whatever feedback and recommendations they think they need to do. I don't want to outthink myself by thinking what are their requirements. I think we should go with what we know and then turn it over to them, and we should do it as quickly as possible.
But I think we
In
could,
a reasonable way.
I think the idea of having some detailed explanations, and because there is some stuff in here that, like Councilor Freeman didn't quite understand the fair market rent thing. I mean, I think there are some things in there that we need
yes.
to.
It needs, a cover letter needs to be
Yeah.
provided.
I think it has some explanations
lot
as
of
to what it is
explanations.
and why we made those decisions,
They-
because that will be the point of contention.
My fear is the cover letter may end up being larger than the ordinance.
I think that it could be,
All right, I'd like to move
but
on.
so what?
All right, so we'll continue this at the next meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just, I made a bunch of things of my own comments, mostly wordsmithing, and hopefully you can take a look at those too later on.
Okay.
Can I just ask one quibble that Mike, that we'll have for the next meeting? Will we be discussing this exact draft with comments in front of us in line like we are? Will we be discussing our collective sort of comments on that are worked into a draft? I'm just wondering what we're going to look at next time.
We're going to have our existing draft. I think we should have comments on the side that have been collected, and then go through them, because, I mean, I think 90% of the comments aren't going to end up in the draft, and if we embed them into the draft.
Agree.
That, so I think it's better at this point to keep the comments on the side, and then go in, and especially based on the items that we think are most important, go in, we'll spend time talking about those, addressing those, and then if we're lucky, we get a new version to look at the end of September that will decide whether or not it's good enough for public hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Just one question with regards to public hearing, and at the risk of like probably annoying people, can we put like limits on how long or?
Our rules of
where
procedure do not allow us to limit the discussion.
Just because we're talking about like, for a public hearing, especially if it goes over 2 sessions, we're talking a month. So-
I'm hoping that we will stick to just one session of public
I
hearing.
hope so
after-
too,
after
yeah.
this.
I think
We
that'll
won't,
work.
we shouldn't need 2
Yeah.
after this next draft, because we're just, what we will hear is, we will hear people saying, what, I wanted you to do this and you didn't do this. So, just because they say it again doesn't mean we're going to do it.
Yeah.
We've already thought about it hard, and there's solid reasons why we're not going down that route.
Yeah, and I
And which
really
is-
hope we can keep it to 1 session.
And I'm hoping that maybe I can have a draft of the cover letter to go with that public hearing too, so that people can see why we provided that. That's sort of the outreach informational thing that I took away as part of it.
Yeah, M talked about that. It was almost like a fact sheet, a Q&A sheet,
You need a
but why isn't it
Right.
in downtown,
Why-
it-
Why isn't
yeah.
it downtown? Yet all these things that were asked and raised, it's like, well, let's address them so that they know, and hopefully, they can still say, I disagree with you, but they understand where we're coming from.
Would it be I'd be happy to, host something during a workday and invite anyone to come in and ask questions. Would that be useful?
I think
That's
the
a good
time
question.
spent on a FAQ will be the best time. If there's 30 questions on there, question, answer, boom, 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 and then people can read that
and revisit it.
and it comes right from what somebody said, hey, there's this thing I don't like. You can address it and say, we heard you,
This is,
here's why.
How about if I put together an FAQ for the next meeting? And we'll
You could-
just have that in?
Yeah,
You could
yeah.
do that.
Oh, great.
it's more easily shareable too. It's
Yeah,
worth
yeah.
it.
That'll be in your next packet.
All right. Oh, boy. Yes. Recommendation from the Durham Energy Committee to allow small group net metering in the core commercial zoning districts. Has everybody read this? It's a basic. So, in a nutshell, for the people who are watching, the Energy Committee, in response, I believe, to the request from the church, which church was that?
Oh, St. George's?
St. George's solar array. So they wanted to be able to, they have 2 properties over there, they wanted the solar array to be able to support both properties. Our zoning doesn't allow that. So the Energy Committee is saying, you know, are you sure? Because that would be technically a small group net metering operation.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And the Energy Committee says, you know, it doesn't make sense for us to not be letting people share their solar with each other across properties.
Here, here.
So they asked us to take a look at that and change the table of uses to allow it.
And so the Energy Committee is thinking, did try to think through that. And the feeling was that the downtown land is so valuable per square foot that it's not someplace that someone is going to develop a solar farm if there's other viable uses. It makes sense to do, in conjunction with a parking lot, like kind of what St. George has been proposing. It also felt that the definition of net metering in and of itself, small group net metering, I think it's 100 kilowatts, so that could expand up to about 4,000 square feet. So that's a large footprint. That's a very large house, for example. But there's not really open land in the down that could be built, with the one exception being maybe on Church Hill. Church Hill, however, it's a steep property. It's in terms of the 1921 Main Street. It's a steep property. It's currently wooded. If you're going to do a project that large, you do have to buffer it for small group net metering. And it's hard to argue that would be the most valuable use of that land to a developer. And so the Energy Committee felt like the likelihood of a project occurring downtown that would be kind of against what we're hoping to see out of this ordinance. So something that wouldn't be a positive contribution to downtown vibrancy and to the tax base, something that would be an eyesore, that it just wasn't really feasible for those sorts of projects to happen downtown, and we wouldn't see them. But we didn't want to say, St. George has these 2 properties, and if they want to both use the same solar, but what if, say, 2 or 3 denser properties downtown owned by different people, one of them had some space in their parking lot, like the bank, right? Where they could do some sort of solar, or on a solar canopy or something like that, but it only made financial sense if they could also, do net metering with it. To allow that kind of flexibility, given that we are already getting a request from a church, and we have multiple churches in that area, so, and multiples of them have solar now, so it just seemed that was kind of the thinking of that.
I don't know if I'm wrong here, but if you had a condo association, let's say one of the large buildings down in that area went to condos. And a condo association wanted to do solars on the roof that would be shared by all the owners. Wouldn't that be a small group net metering?
Oh, if it was just serving their own development, that would be accessory.
To the
Yeah. Which they can do by right everywhere, except you can't do freestanding in central business. But multi-unit accessory or non-residential accessory, you can do everywhere, building freestanding by right.
But if there's 12 meters and it's one solar array that's supporting 12 different meters, for instance.
Yeah, if it's just for that development, that'd be accessory.
Okay.
Unless they wanted to expand it to net metering, then there's, different rules.
That's where it gets complicated. So, okay, so I was wrong there.
Well, I
But
have a
anyway,
little
so-
confusion with that too, because the net metering definition we use are we using the same definition as the state of what net metering is?
All right. I'm not sure, but
Okay.
that will require some research. So the thing in front of us is, do we have a consensus that we want to move forward with a minor amendment
Yeah.
to allow this? And we might have one or two other things attached with it that are also minor. My hope is, in the past, when we've had a bunch of small little minor things that don't go together, they're often got too large of a package and it confused people. So I'd like to move things forward in groups of 3 or 4 small changes that are easily understood as being separate things. So I'll probably ask that Mr. Barron tack 1 or 2 of the things that we've been falling behind onto this one as well.
So is that, that's under, in the table of uses, under small group net metering, freestanding, and would that be changing in all 5 commercial core, it's an X? Would that then be a P for all 5 of those?
That was the Energy Committee's recommendation, yes.
Is that all right? So we'll bring that back for public hearing, or if I combine it with some other things, you can look at it once and then go to public hearing?
Well, does anybody have any concerns with any of the downtown districts being included in this?
No.
And is that Churchill, Central Business, Professional Office, and Courthouse?
And Coast Corner.
And Coast Corner.
So we could go to public hearing for that anytime, or I can combine that with some other things if you want to look at it together first.
I'd like to get some things done, but
Well, why don't I bring some things to you that have been hanging around for the next meeting and include this and see what you think.
all right. All right, second vote item, discussion about expanding residential options in the downtown area. So this is Todd's letter.
Yeah.
And I sort of made my point clear earlier, or I hope I did, where it's that's an issue that we will need to look at. However, this is, in my opinion, a big issue. It's going to be complex.
Yeah.
It's not tweak 1 or 2 things. It's going to be its own version of a workforce housing zoning amendment type.
There's a lot
for the
of research.
downtown.
Yeah, there's a lot of research.
Things to do, but it should be on our list of things to do, not things that we are doing right now.
Well,
Because we have too many balls and we need to watch how many balls we have. And until we get, we have 2 big ones already. We can't start a 3rd big one.
no, well, because Todd brought this up at the Housing Task Force, and then what we had a discussion there was, and that was the day you weren't there, that we would, there's a couple of us on the Housing Task Force that have had, especially I have had, and Al Howland has had, and Heather in some respects too, with dealing with downtown businesses already, and have a good understanding about what's going on down there. And then I know that Peyton and Tom had started to look at this too, and so we were thinking that maybe with a couple of and you've got 2 members of the planning board that are on the Housing Task Force, if we could partner up with Housing Task Force and the guys from the planning board, and we could just kind of create a working group to really start getting into this. There's a lot of stuff that has to be looked at.
Did you have people on the Housing Task Force interested in actually doing the work?
We do have 3 people on the Housing Task Force that are interested in it.
Okay.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Yes.
Once you're done.
Oh, but because the reality is there's an incredible amount of work and research that has to be done with this. There's dealing with, talking to about the infrastructure there. You have the differences between the Main Street properties and the Mill Plaza. So I think that there's some real work that could be done to start to look at some. And then what's the actual build-out options?
Well,
And I think that we have to include our downtown businesses. And we also have to think about parking
Yep.
in all of this, and it's,
And what kind of housing density? There's a lot. There's a
Yeah,
lot of
there's
layers.
a lot to it.
Yeah.
All right, those three members from the task force, were any of them board members
Of the
that
planning
are
board?
interested in doing the work? Yeah, of the board.
Yeah, that's Heather and I, and then Al Howland.
Yeah, so we can't team you guys up with Tom and Peyton.
We can if you want.
Yeah, we can.
Then it's just a question, is that a official committee?
It would be out of
Which
the,
it Depends how you, the more people
would
you
have to
have,
be.
the more.
it would have to be, because there'd be,
If we got four, if there are four members of the planning board on
Oh, if
it,
you have four, yeah.
then you are now talking, everything has to be a public meeting.
Yeah.
So,
But if we were to create like a task force or something,
Like a study group, can we just call it?
study
Yeah, I
group
like
would be a
that.
good name, yeah.
would that get us out of having it to be a
I
public
don't
meeting?
believe so, no.
Well, I mean,
No,
if it's very
because,
informal.
because there have been court cases.
I get
throughout the
it.
state.
It would be viewed as trying to skirt around the public meeting.
Yes.
You had questions, Erica.
Yeah, no, just for my curiosity, maybe I just forgot. So when we're saying downtown, as in where the potential changes would be, not just the storefronts, but can we just discuss real quick as to what we're talking about? And I'm
It would-
asking because
well,
I live right here.
It
So-
would be,
the blue
the five
stuff.
zones that represent our commercial districts would all be potentially in play. We wouldn't have to touch all of them, but I mean, that would be what the legwork, early legwork, would try to figure out, is what parts. I mean, the Main Street area for the Central Business District, I know definitely would be included. Do we include Churchill? Do we include, as part of it or not? Do we include Courthouse District? Those are, I mean, I know most people, when they think downtown, they think just the Main Street,
Just central business.
central business area, and we could do something for just the Central Business District, but it might not be the best thing to do, right?
And all those
I'm
areas
just
would
saying
have
because
different-
for my lot, I tried to have a lot of work done, and we went to the zoning board and things like that for our case, and I think we had like 20 people show up against it. So when we're discussing as to where, just be ready for that.
Oh, yeah. I think,
So-
I think there's awareness.
That was, yes.
So I think that that's something that when it comes to whatever we come like out with, when it comes to like documentation and things like that, I'm sure that whatever we put forward is also, we don't just completely retract it, like once the opinions come out.
No, and the other thing that I think people have to, a lot of people don't recognize yet, is that all those buildings, the century-old buildings in the downtown area, I've talked to a couple of owners who've done renovations, and they wish, in hindsight, that they had done a complete tear down, because it would have been cheaper.
And then my second question, just for my memory, with Todd's email, there was also a forwarded chain from one of the owners of like 3 businesses downtown, and that person is talking about closing, if I remember correctly.
Roger Hayden,
Correct?
yeah.
Reason being?
He's getting ready to retire.
Okay, so it's not lack of business.
It's not lack of business, he's just getting ready to retire.
Okay. It'll be interesting to see like what the other business owners are thinking.
All right.
can I?
So, yes.
So, this evening, we heard a letter being read by, it was Mr. Meadows, right? And he suggested larger engagement, actually, is what he was alluding to, and you were kind of talking about that, of getting community input. I think this is what we need, the larger engagement on community input, not the zoning on workforce housing. I don't think we would get many other people than what we saw here, who, you know.
Right.
But when we're talking about the downtown districts and additional housing, that's where I think it would be really beneficial to have one of those community events like we did years ago when we were looking at the
Master plan?
Mill Plaza?
Mill Plaza.
The charrette?
Yeah, the design charrette, and have something along those lines for what we'd be considering.
So where
for
did
the
that get us
downtown.
with Mill Plaza, though?
Well, no, it got
No.
us somewhere. It's just that the owner chose to turn their back
Okay.
to the results of that.
Talking about, it would be new zoning, not development.
New use, new zoning, but people would want to understand, what does that mean in the tangible? What are the results of that new zoning? And that's where planners can offer their insight along with developers. This is what might occur there, and then you can start putting
Yeah,
stuff
no, I
out.
agree, and that's maybe, I think that's one of the reasons why Todd went to the Housing Task Force, because they're kind of already building that mechanism for
Trying-
doing
yeah,
and information. They've done a couple of things before with regards to surveys to businesses and such.
But
So-
there is some research that I think before, I totally agree on as far as community outreach. But I think when we go to a community outreach, there has to be some realistic
Facts.
information that
Of
the
course.
community needs to
Yeah.
know. And I think that's what we need to gather. It's not about like going out, what can we do? I think there's some legwork that needs to be done. And I think that's what we were talking about at the Housing Task Force, that getting out there and finding what land are we talking about? What is the zoning we have now? What would be the size? What is the infrastructure cost? And if we're looking at Main Street, we're looking at Churchill, we're looking at Mill Plaza. Are these all different? They're very different. I think so.
Maybe, yeah, there should be in
there's
different
some-
sections maybe, because, you know, and the other thing is, you know, when the last central business district went through with the height increase, we know that that didn't go well, right? So right now we have 3-story limits in some places, and we've got where maybe there isn't a 3-story limit, there's a single family, there's a single
Setback
story,
for-
but there's very few. So the thing is you have so much land, and each property is like 0.12, point this point. But, so if you did it as a 3-story, it would give you 10 apartments. If you had, you know, I mean, we really need to get down to the infrastructure challenges. What does it really mean? Because when Todd started talking about it, you know, he thought, well, if we give them density, then maybe they'll do the work themselves on the ground. But when you think about it, you've got 2 owners here, 1 owner here, and if this 1 owner here wants to build a 3-story or 4-story, and he has to do infrastructure, what's his infrastructure is going to go from point A to point B, which is, you know, 2 steps. So, I mean, if you start to really get complex on it, you start to understand the challenges in that downtown area, it's terrifying.
Yeah, well,
But we need the facts. How many houses are you going to,
Yeah.
how many apartments are you going to get? That's the number one should be, what do we think we'd get if we had these things go on?
Yeah.
And then you could wiggle all of the other stuff into that as well. That's my thought.
And I totally agree. I was thinking it might be useful, you know, I'm new to this, and so when I started trying to put together something that coalesces information, overlay district downtown, you start running into a lot of complexity. You've got a historic overlay district, you have a 3-story height limitation. I don't really know the history of that. I don't know anything
Nobody
about
wants
that. I've
tall
tried to
buildings.
sort of back
Yeah, is
out
this,
that.
like, this is like my hands, this is all of them so far that I've.
So,
sketched.
and then you have the history of Mill Plaza, which is sort of the elephant in the room, I think, where it's obviously a parcel that should be
And that's a-
redeveloped, and
that's
it's
a
just
complete-
screaming for redevelopment. You've got historic overlay, which is one thing. You've got this height, you know, I'm not quite sure what that is, but a 3-story height limitation. Then you've got Mill Plaza, and then you just have core infrastructure as well, which is you might want to do something, but then the infrastructure may or may not allow that. And then it's who covers the cost of that. So I'm not sure of the infrastructure limitations that exist downtown, how that would be covered. And then I guess I would want to just understand the initial, makes sense to sort of tackle in a prioritized way to work down through that. Because I started going through it and I was like, well, it's very complex. But I think when you imagine the vision at the end of it, you could obviously see, you know, maybe Mill Plaza built out with 1 story of affordable housing to get an extra story of something. And so you could imagine some things, but it's very difficult how to get from that And then you look at other college towns, you know, I was just in Athens, Georgia 2 weeks ago, and you look at that downtown and boy, that's active and vibrant. And there's an awful lot going on. There are hotels, there are restaurants, there are blocked off pedestrian ways, there are music venues, you know, there's a lot happening. And, you know, the scale is obviously they're bigger, but, you know, you could still have things like that taken.
I think massing is your friend here when you're trying to think about what's it mean. Like if we look at buildings that are 1 story high, we look at them and we know they got to go if we want to maximize potential. So I think the charrette kind of notion that Richard was touching on is where you just put boxes there. What does this kind of scenario look like? Oh, okay, put a box that represents a 3-story on that footprint. And people can start putting their head around that, like, oh, okay, there's a box and it's got X number of people in it. And who cares what the siding looks like? Who cares what the windows look like? That's all noise in the end that is well down the road. So the massing concept is how I think you convince people, like the downtown circle could have a lot more there. I think when Mill Plaza got developed, the massing is what showed everybody like, wow, this is not what we want, because it was like so massive. Plus the other history. But I think all those lots in the 1 stories, you could very quickly put a mass there. And what I mean by that is a box that represents the size we want to get to.
Well, the thing, though, what we really have to come
and then
back
the
to.
infrastructure piece is solvable. It's just money.
Well, but that's just the point, and I don't think the community understands fully it, and I don't think the town council is taking the infrastructure to simply say, give them density and they're going to pay for millions of dollars of a complete redo of the street and a complete redo of Mill Plaza. I think there's some facts that need to be gathered and put in a understandable document so we can see what are our challenges. So therefore, what can we do? And I think that if we try to just do a charrette before we have those facts, we'll have we'll have more disappointed.
Well, I don't mean like a giant full-blown charrette. I mean somebody who's thought about, like, what do we think the future looks like? Put the boxes in there. I don't mean a full-blown invite the whole public. I mean, put the Legos into places and say, what do they look like?
Well, what can physically be done there?
Yeah.
That is going to be something for us to deal with at a later time.
And those.
But how do you address the downtown housing memo without being able to provide that vision of what the boxes look like in the end?
Well, what I meant is, I mean, we haven't touched on the fact of, you also have to look at the economics of the whole, of the properties, right? So, which is the big reason that nothing's happening with a 3-story limit is economically is do a rebuild. You got to go higher. However, why do we have a 3-story limit? Because after Paulie's Project Orion were done, people got scared at how massive those buildings were. Mass was the enemy.
But in that case, those buildings, the story they tell is they're pretty nice and they look good and nobody's grumping about them today. So people were scared.
Oh, all right.
I think that might be the challenge, is that would be our opinion, but that might not be the opinion that's going to be mobilized and people writing letters.
Because all those people who are arguing about it, that's why Mill Plaza died.
And you can't, but you can say fine to that, but you can't have it both ways. We hear about the development transect, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that transect is not anchored on 1-story buildings in your central business district.
Or even 3-story buildings.
Exactly. And we've got to look beyond, you know, this is 20, 30 years out.
Yes.
This is not immediate.
Maybe part of the problem, part of a solution would be to move Mill Plaza into Church Hill.
Or make its own zone.
Then you can reach Central Business District, and Mill Plaza is not part of it, because Mill Plaza is a sore thumb when it comes to trying to change anything in Central Business.
So where do you put it? You're suggesting Church Hill?
Yeah.
I would say its own. I would
Yeah,
create its own.
zoning district.
I would create its own zoning because it's completely
Probably makes
different than,
sense.
it's a completely different aspect of business than any other part.
How many of you were on the board for the Mill Plaza? Right?
Yep.
Many of us, right? So what if that was a workforce housing project? What if that was a different project? I mean, we heard a lot of public testimony about what they wanted out of in downtown, urban, mixed use. That was it. They were just targeting the wrong people. And maybe a story too high in some of those buildings. But it provided parking, it provided a lot of bedrooms, and it provided retail.
But it also completely redid the infrastructure and addressed the creek.
Yeah.
So those are the things that we'd have to look at, because we'd have to look at what would be the cost. And I'm sorry, but a workforce housing development is going to have to go in there. Would they be willing to pay for all that? It may be something the town would.
Perhaps.
And so there are options, but if they're expending that's a lot.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of
It
work.
could also be a great opportunity to do inclusionary zoning in order to, thinking of TIF, but also thinking of, okay, if there are major infrastructure challenges that are more costly and it's going to be too hard to do 100,
Oh,
Yeah.
any sort of
Inclusionary
development
zone,
like
yeah.
that is
Yeah,
inclusionary.
yeah.
You're going to have $1 million condos in there that, hey, we're retired, we're empty nesters living in who knows where. Dear, let's go back to UNH. Let's relive those days at UNH in our $1 million single-story living condo with the car downstairs. It would sell.
It could very
That's
much.
exactly what's happening in Athens, Georgia.
Bingo.
Because people are leaving Atlanta, they have their $1 million, they're paying cash for the condo in Athens, and they're very happy to live there.
Yeah, because there's a
And
lot
Athens
to
has
do.
an awful lot going on.
And a rebuild would create more opportunities for better business.
Of course.
Well, of course, we have that project. It's still on the back burner, sitting at the corner of Pearlie and Maine.
Is that?
Pettybrook and
I mean, Doug Clark had that concept, right? You got
And
Which one?
Pettybrook and
The one
the
that's
yellow
in court.
house.
the Yellow House.
You have this
Yellow
right
house.
here.
Yeah, but
that's
that-
in
You just
court.
described the yellow
But there was
house.
absolutely no parking option there. He
They
came
were
in
going
without nothing there for
Well,
parking.
they started that concept drawing. The first concept drawing had parking underneath.
Right.
And then he got rid
Well-
of it because it was too expensive.
Because of the
Well,
ledge.
Then they had the problem with drainage there. So then he had to have permeable pavers because they couldn't meet the runoff requirement because we have drain problems in the downtown area.
And then as a butter suit 'em.
Well, then we have the abutter problem.
But the thing is, the task force is.
Because they don't like, I
the
mean,
task
most
force
of those
is gonna be
abutters
looking at
all
this
along that
downtown.
road, as far as
So
I can
think
tell,
we
hate each
create-
other.
I think we can get some
That's how
legwork
hard
done
it is to do a
and start
nice
looking at it.
project. You die from 1,000
So,
cuts.
so can I just speak to that for just 1 second? Because I think that's difficult. and
Dying
it's-
from 1,000 cuts.
And it's actually, when Mill Plaza was going through, I was actually excited that something was happening there. But, I was sort of busy with my own life right there, and I wasn't, watching all the DCAT meetings, and I wasn't following it as closely. I just assumed sort of it would happen. And I guess the challenge is there's a silent majority of people who kind of stay out of that and don't pay attention and just assume that's moving along. And so it's very difficult to have a vocal group that counters something. And so I guess the challenge is, how do you balance that policy-making wise? Sort of doing what you think is necessary versus have a vocal minority or a vocal group that's countering something for whatever reason. I'm not going to, put any motives on their side. But that's a difficult thing. I think you could try to counter that. I think we're working through that right now in the affordable housing, workforce housing area, but that's a difficult situation. So no matter what we do here, I think you're going to encounter that pushback. And so I think it's a challenge on, how do you communicate to everyone else that what you're doing is important when you know that you're going to get a vocal minority, not even minority, just a vocal group of people that follow things very closely that may come out against it for whatever reason.
Well, I think what I kind of said to Richard a few minutes back is that, there is that disconnect that we always see, right? And I think on one side we have Todd that is for the more development and things like that downtown, but then there's also a large Durham population that will be against it. And it's weighing, well, both of them, it's weighing what the town needs for its future and for its development, and to not see so many storefronts that are empty and things like that.
See, that is, but we heard a speaker earlier today who said that's the wrong way to go. So, you know, was set the goals that we want, right? And the goals that a majority of the town, or the majority of the loudness that we're getting is keep the current nature. Don't change Durham in such a way that I don't recognize it anymore.
Exactly, yeah.
Even though that's slowly driving Durham to death.
Yeah. I think sometimes, I think it is the responsibility of those that make the decisions for a municipality to make it for the common good and not to just listen to.
Yeah.
Because you got to remember, you might have 20 people show up, and let's all just be honest, and no offense to the people, there are some very thoughtful, they put a lot of time and effort into this, but they're the same people. But what we don't hear from is the other 6,500 that don't show up. And, you know, and one planning board chair in some other town said, okay, I've got, 10 people here that don't like it, but what about the other 10,000 that aren't here?
And change is inevitable, for a town. Unless you're Sturbridge or Jamestown, things are going to change. And that is, it's part of the vitality of a town and the life cycle of a community. And Durham has been hampered with the fact that we have a postage-sized stamp commercial core. I've mentioned it before. Think about Dover's commercial district and how far it runs and how there's beautiful townhouses along the way. The nature of its development. Durham was a farm. It was nothing between Dover and Exeter. Nothing. It was just farmland until the university came here. And then there was reason for greater business. So it is sort of the concourse of that development that has resulted in a limited downtown core with limited opportunities for sort of the wider streets that we'd like to see, servicing more than just vehicles, servicing the bikes, the peds, along with a nice tree corridor.
No, we don't have it.
We
don't have any room.
No, certainly not on one side of the street we don't. And that much isn't going to change. But I think we can start engaging the public as to looking ahead. And for many people who have their greatest concern, I don't think they're going to see that. I think the reality of the situation is the kind of development that we're looking at, we're not going to close our eyes and snap our fingers and it's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to take generations.
Yeah.
But I think the concept of showing what you would need, because I think that when Todd sent out the letter to the public, I think there was an automatic thought that would take care of everything, that somehow we would be able to populate these areas to meet the needs of, say, our 400, dwelling
downtown
unit
Newmarket.
targets by 2040. And obviously, we don't have a lot of space, and I don't know how high you go to be able to even get. You look at the development at where the cinematic is, goes down to Lafayette into the Portsmouth area. It's a really big space. They're building apartments. They're, tore down the cinematic. It's going to be like 90 units. 90 units. I mean, it's gigantic. And we're not going to get 90 units, as far as I could tell, on one street plus down around.
No, we would literally have to start tearing down existing single-family dwelling units and convert it to multi-units because we just don't have the space in our
And we say
downtown.
we as if we are going to do it, but it's like who is going to put
Who's
that
going
in
to do it?
It's like
The owner.
Exactly.
Whoever the owner.
Right.
Well, and I think that's the other thing, is we know we have a transition in downtown by ownership as well, right? Like you said, we have people that are retiring. We've had people that have had those properties and those shops for many, many, many years. And it's not like the old guard, but these are people that are at the end of their careers in that business, and they're not going to be the ones to throw in, millions of dollars of investment into a new property. They're waiting for somebody to come buy that property to have that vision. And what does that person that's going to buy that, how are they going to know what they can reimagine if they don't see something in our zoning?
To your point, I originally had my software company office in this building, which used to, there was an Ace Hardware across the street from that building. And then this had a chicken wing restaurant in it.
Oh
yeah.
You know where the memories
and
is and
this,
everything?
this corner right here was a small single-family home that was bought after it was rezoned and tore down, redeveloped into what you would look at as a reasonable redevelopment. It looks like it houses a fair number of people. It's brand new, but that was a single lot. And when someone bought that, I was like, whoa, they really overpaid for that. And then lo and behold, you end up with a fairly nice complex right there. So that is the reality of what takes place if things happen there. And there are other probably examples that you could look at that might be there. There was the Ace Hardware or Abishan that was right here, and that was also redeveloped. So,
Well, it's because the zoning was changed. The town made a decision back in the aughts to change the zoning because it saw an economic decline, and they changed the zoning to allow the student-centered developments to come in because of what the zoning was.
And even on my part, and I'll just make a pitch for the way that, Dover, when they amend their zoning ordinances, they include a link directly on their ordinance to what the previous ordinance was. So if you're reading the ordinances, you can link back and you can see what it was and then what the new version is. That's very helpful because I've tried to back out myself what these changes were over
Portsmouth
the
does
years.
that as well.
I have to say it's very difficult. I have to go into PDFs and look at things and to get my head around exactly the change. Now, I don't know if it's intentionally opaque or whatever, but it's difficult for me to follow the changes that were made. But I know they were made because I watched them take place right outside my window. Right. And they were very interesting. So it's like that's one thing I was trying to figure out is what were those changes and levers that were sort of moved around to make that to happen.
There would have been the density allowed for student housing and the how many floors that we would allow. Yeah. And I can tell you that I was on the planning board for both of those examples that you pointed out, and they were seen as so extreme. And there was a lot of adversity in town about allowing those developments to occur. It's almost, well, I can't think of one where it was, that's a jackpot.
No,
The best that we get is, I support the project, but. Yeah. That's typically the best that we can do.
Actually, the workforce housing overlay district has had more people come out emphatically for it.
But these are specific developments, what I'm speaking to. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, you're absolutely right, and that shouldn't go, unnoticed that we've had a lot of support for this zoning change that we've heard.
It's an interesting concept, I think, because on one side, so rezoning did occur. If it was successful, should we do it again? But then I think going back to Todd's email, there was the thing about urban sprawl. At what point is it urban sprawl? Sorry, go ahead.
I think we do have more resources than we think that already to answer these questions. One is the master plan, which is last dated, I think, 2016. That's not 2024, but it is after a lot of these zoning changes, and there were over 900 people that participated in that. So that is a much larger percentage of the Durham population, and so when we ask ourselves these questions, looking to the master plan is really helpful guidance for what a larger body of the town wants. And I think it can also be really helpful to ask people to rank their priorities, because if they just say, I'd rather things, right? Well, if you ask them to rank it to, you know, a vibrant downtown along with, you know, smaller ecological footprint, along with conserving rural areas, when you ask people to rank those, then you understand better, you know, you can't say that you want all things if things aren't naturally happening that way. You have to give priorities in order to create that future. And so asking people to prioritize, turning to our master plan. And I disagree a little bit. I think there are a few people who've said, I don't want any change, but I think the majority of what we hear from people is, I want change that is along the lines of the reasons that I love Durham and the reasons that I chose to live here or the reasons that I've chosen to stay here. And a lot of that is outlined in our master plan, but a lot of times people say, you know, they value Durham's agricultural roots. I don't hear that as we want zero change. I hear that as we want to continue to have some farm use in our town. We want to continue to have some sense of that agricultural heritage. It doesn't mean there's no changes. It means that the changes that we approve are in keeping with those values and those reasons, those qualities of life that we most appreciate in Durham. You know, I think it's true that people don't want Durham to become Dover or even Exeter. They're not the same towns. You know, they're looking to conserve certain things that they see in Durham that those towns do not have. But I think that there's ways to do that and embrace change, but it's keeping the values and the things that people like about living in Durham.
All right, we're now approaching 9:30. I don't think we have the energy for zoning definitions, but we do have some minutes for July 24th and July 31st. Any substantive changes for July 24th that haven't already been sent to Karen? I'll move that we accept the minutes of July 24th.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right. None of the latter. And for July 31st?
I was not present.
Yeah, but for whatever reason, why can't I find?
This is not a correction at all to the minutes, but I'm just confused as to the status of something, which is the off-highway recreational vehicle. What did you end up saying as a response to that, Michael? Is it okay to prohibit uses in our table of uses and not offer a definition of them?
If you're what that term refers to, if in common parlance, we don't need a definition.
Does anyone remember what the board decided? Is off-highway recreational vehicle a common enough term that that if someone comes and asks, is this an off-highway recreational vehicle, it's a cut and dry answer without any legal questions there?
I believe it is. Unless you're concerned that a bicycle would be included.
I think that could there be a debate about whether or not e-bikes are included in that? I don't know. I think there's no debate in terms of whether ADA vehicles are excluded from that, but a little more complex.
It's off-highway, is that?
Off-highway.
Off-highway recreational vehicles.
So the key there is the recreational vehicle, that it is not used on the highway.
So it's not registered to operate on the road.
It's not registered to operate on the road, and it's typically considered to be your ATVs, your snowmobiles, etc. But with the increasing use of things like e-bikes and scooters, well, at what point does that, and is the fact that it's electric as opposed to manually operated make a difference?
Well, I know you have to register snowmobiles. Do you have to register
Yeah, but-
ATVs?
No, but they're not on the street. There's a registration process,
But
but
they're
they're not
They're only allowed
registered to be on the street.
Right, but
Be
they are
on the roads
registered
if it's part of a
with
trail.
DMV.
Yep.
I mean, that may be a helpful clarifying point.
Well, how would you
So
term it
are you,
anyways?
how did this come up in the minutes? by the way?
Because.
Because it was discussed.
Because it was discussed, it said that I brought up this concern, and then I asked this question, is it okay to not have definitions for these things? And then it says there was additional discussion, but there's no
Decision.
there's no decision listed, so I was now confused as to where we stood.
I thought we left it out.
Yeah, my notes in the thing is that the board deleted ATVs, and then we also, but off-highway recreational vehicles said, eliminated boat, but then off-highway said see all-terrain vehicle, even though that was deleted. So I think the intention was just to delete everything, even though a facility is prohibited. So that's how I took it. I just deleted both definitions. And I noted that on the definitions thing.
Okay, because I don't think, the last definitions I have is from July 24th, which doesn't cover up to O's.
Which is well, we used that version on July 31st as well. So, but yeah, it would not include any of the changes that we made that night.
Right, so that's where I was just confused. So it's not,
Well, I have it here as having been addressed, because I deleted both, but we have your comments in purple, so you could raise it again if you want when we go through this.
No, should
The
we just make a
definitions.
note in the minutes, though? To whatever it was you said after,
Oh, I wouldn't mess with the minutes, but we can deal with it when we get to the definitions again if you want.
I mean, I think we already, my concern is I think we've already moved past that point in the discussion, and I don't want to go back. I just wasn't sure what the outcome was, so
okay.
I was confused.
Oh, well, I have the outcome that both are eliminated in entirety,
Okay.
you know, if I got that right. And that's on this, you know, reflected here.
I will that for my own record, and then my questions answered, I think, so thank you.
So is that a motion?
Minutes okay?
The minutes are fine. It was just, it brought up another point of confusion, so.
So do I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Abstentions? One abstention from Erica. And I think, anything else, folks?
A motion to adjourn.